what people need to do is they should track their sleep. I've been tracking people's sleep for 26 years without a ring or without a watch. And here's what you do.
That's Dr. Breus, clinical psychologist and sleep specialist.
You have a sleep diary, right? And you just write down, there's like 10 questions. What time did I go to bed? How long do I think it took me to fall asleep? What time did I wake up? A couple of other questions like that. You will get a fairly decent understanding of how well you are sleeping just by monitoring yourself.
I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of Crisp, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. Crisp started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. Dr. Michael Breus is a clinical psychologist and one of the nation's top sleep specialists. Widely known as the Sleep Doctor, Dr. Breus leads as a researcher, consultant, and performance advisor using cutting-edge sleep science to help executives, athletes, and organizations optimize focus, decision-making, and overall health. I sat down with Dr. Breus to discuss how poor sleep destroys decision-making and emotional control, why your evening habits dramatically affect next-day focus and energy, and the biggest mistakes people make that impact sleep quality and how to fix them.
That's a big misnomer. Is there's a lot of people out there who are like, melatonin, I got to take it every single night. Very, very few people require melatonin.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. Dr. Breus, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I will tell you, the topic we're going to talk about today, I know you're obviously passionate about, but I am as well, talking about sleep.
I love it, brother. I love it.
So why don't we just start off by talking about why sleep is important? Why, obviously we all sleep, varying amounts of hours and varying quality and so on, but why do we sleep and what happens when we sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is always a great place to start, kind of sleep 101, if you will. And so sleep affects every organ system and every disease state. Everything you do better with a good night's sleep. There are very few things out there in the universe that you can apply that to. I think you can apply that to water, and I think you can apply that to air. And even air sometimes, like you need it, but sometimes it's not too healthy because it's polluted or things of that. Same with water. So, when you start to look at the fundamentals of health, I don't see how you can get very far without understanding sleep. I've been fortunate. I've written 5 books. My newest book is called Sleep, Drink, Breathe. Wellness is Too Freaking Complicated, which, by the way, I think it is. And I get to the bottom line of it all. And, people have said, why do you write books about things that people already naturally do, Michael? Don't we already do those pretty well? No, we don't do those pretty well. I wish we did do those pretty well. But the basics of it is that sleep is recovery. Sleep is where you have a physical recovery and then you have a mental recovery. So every night before you go to sleep, your body basically scans itself and says, okay, what kind of damage got done today? What kind of emotions did I feel today? And then it accordingly gives you the right stages of sleep to recover from that. So as an example, stages 3, 4 are what we call deep sleep or delta sleep. This is your physical restoration. This is the wake up and feel great sleep, right? It's kind of like bringing your car into the body shop and getting the dents and the dinks and the scratches kind of pulled out every single night. A couple of different processes that go on there that I think are important to mention. The biggest one is something called the glymphatic system. Now, I'm not going to get hyper technical, but the glymphatic system is kind of like the waste management system of the brain. So it's like the dump truck that comes in and picks up the garbage every single night. So when we're thinking and we're doing all of kinds of stuff, our bodies have electrical signals that go across the brain. When it's doing that, it actually produces a residual protein. And then when that protein accumulates, it ain't so good for your brain. In fact, these proteins called beta amyloid and tau, when they accumulate in your brain, they wrap around the nerves, and that's called Alzheimer's disease. We don't want that. So we want a highly functioning glymphatic system. And the way to do that is to get more deep sleep. But that's not the only stage of sleep that's really super important. The other big stage of sleep is REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep. And so this is your mental restoration. So this is where we move information from our short-term memory to our long-term memory. We kind of create this organizational substructure, kind of like a filing cabinet for data that's coming in through your eyes and your ears and your nose and your mouth, right? And things you want to be able to retrieve later on, maybe make a good argument or point, or remember how to ride a bicycle. All of those things happen during REM sleep. And so the goal historically has been, let's just not mess those up. Let's do everything we can to get a reasonable night's sleep. And I really want to focus more on quality than quantity, because let's be fair, not everybody's got the opportunity to get 8 hours of sleep a night. I get it. People are busy, they're practicing law, they're running their families, they're running their businesses, all that stuff is going on. And so a lot of times people come to me and they say, if I can only get 6.5 hours, Michael, or 7 hours, how do I get the best 6.5 or the best 7? And I don't think that's a bad question to ask. A lot of sleep doctors would be like, no, you need 8. I don't really subscribe to that because, quite frankly, it's not how it works in my life. I go to bed around 11. I wake up around 6. I do it naturally within my circadian rhythm. So I know and understand enough to be able to do this and accomplish it pretty well. I'm 57 years old. I haven't had any coffee today, and this is my level of energy. So I'm pretty good with it. But sleep really does affect every single system. It affects you cognitively. So when you don't sleep well, you don't make decisions well. Believe it or not, there was one study that showed that you don't even, when you're not well slept and somebody pitches an idea to you, you're not able to understand the fine points of the idea and be able to understand if it's a good idea or a bad idea, which is kind of interesting. Sleep affects your memory. Again, inability to retrieve information, inability to walk into a room and remember everybody's name, all those kind of things. It also affects you emotionally. REM sleep is a big, big emotional center. I call dreams, which is that kind of crazy movie that goes on in your head, at least a lot of the time during REM sleep, as emotional metabolism. Let me explain. So when you've had a rough day, let's say something very joyous has happened or something very depressing has happened, it takes a lot out of you and your brain's got to process that. That happens during REM sleep, specifically during dreaming. Now, I want to be very, very clear. You dream in all stages. We used to only dream during REM sleep. Turns out that's not true. REM sleep has kind of interesting dreams, though. They're very creative. They're very fantastical. Weird shit is happening in your REM dreams, okay? In your non-REM dreams, it's very procedural. You're riding a bike, you're walking through the woods, you're talking with your partner, things that you would normally do. We think that about 60 to 70% of non-REM sleep you're dreaming, but closer to 90% of REM sleep you're dreaming. So there's a little bit of a disparity there. And again, the dreams are very, very different. But this emotional metabolism idea comes through when we talk about nightmares in particular. So as an example, a nightmare is defined as a scary dream that gets to the point where you wake up and actually want to get out of the dream. This is really based on fear and emotions that are going on during this particular stage of sleep. And what happens is when you wake up, you stop processing them, which is why people get tormented by their nightmares, because they get to the processing part and then they wake up, and they start from the beginning, they get to the processing part and they wake up, and they can't get past that scenario. That's when somebody can come in like a clinical psychologist, which happens to be my background, and start to work with these people to help further that emotionality and be able to get them through their sleep in a unique way. I've actually spent the last year and a half becoming a dream therapist. This is different than a sleep doctor, and this is different than a dream interpreter. This is where we actually use the dream as fodder for therapy in session. So, for example, when somebody's out in nightmare, I can bring them into session, understand what's going on in their nightmare, understand the emotions underneath it, and help them get through those emotions, and that actually changes the course of the dream. So it's really quite fascinating work. But I would say that when we don't sleep, we have a physical response. Everything slows down, especially things like reaction time. A study was done looking at athletes. And if you're a 22-year-old NBA star and you lose approximately 2 hours of sleep the night before a game, you play like a 33-year-old NBA star. 10 years difference. Big, big difference. So we know it affects you physically. We know it affects you emotionally. We know it affects you cognitively. So sleep is kind of like the thing that does a body good.
So I want to follow up on this in the sense that I know you mentioned getting varying hours of sleep and really talking about the quality of sleep, the amount of restorative sleep you're getting, REM sleep, deep sleep, et cetera. Is there an optimal amount of sleep, or is that just vary per person? And how does somebody know the right amount of sleep for them? Like they might say, look, I got 6 hours of sleep, but I feel great. Is that acceptable, or should they push for more?
It is. So you are your best doctor. I tell people this all the time. Putting yourself up to some standards of somebody else is probably not appropriate. Like, look, I'm a 57-year-old Caucasian male. If I can find a group of 57-year-old Caucasian males who are my height and my weight, then that might be a group that I would want to compare myself to. But generally speaking, I'm much more individualized. Women in particular are very individualized. Depending upon where they are in their menstrual cycle or where they are in their menopause journey, that can have tremendous differences in the amount and quality of their sleep. So here's what I tell people, Michael, is I say, when you wake up in the morning, if you feel good within 30 to 60 seconds of waking up, you got a good night's sleep. I can guarantee it. But if you wake up and you've hit the snooze button 3 times and you're feeling like crap and you don't want to go work out or you don't want to talk to your partner or your kids are pissing you off, then there's a pretty decent likelihood that you didn't get the quality of sleep that you're looking for, right? And quality really does trump quantity in certain instances. But I want to be clear. Anybody who gets less than 5.5 hours of sleep a night, that's not good. Generally speaking, that is a lower level limit. Like when somebody tells me they get less than 6 on the regular, that's problematic. So for that situation, I'm thinking, could they have a sleep disorder? Could they have insomnia? Could they have undiagnosed sleep apnea? Could they have restless leg syndrome, periodic limb movements? There's a whole host of different things. But when somebody says to me, I only sleep 5 hours a night, that's kind of a red flag that something is not good. But when somebody turns to me and says, Michael, I get 6 hours and 15 minutes to 6 hours and 30 minutes. I wake up, I feel spot on. I'm ready to meet the day. I'm like, go for it, brother. Like, keep up the good work. Now, I will tell you that that can change over time. Right. And so at age 57, I am not as peppy as I once was at age 37, but having reasonable expectations on that can be good as well. So I think what people need to do is they should track their sleep. So let's talk about sleep tracking for half a second, because there's a lot of different ways to go about doing it. I do not think that you have to go out and buy a sleep tracker. They're helpful, and I'll show you the pros and cons. But to be clear, you don't have to buy a Whoop or an Aura or a Happy Ring or a Human Up or whatever thing is out there in order to understand your sleep. I've been tracking people's sleep for 26 years without a ring or without a watch. And here's what you do is you have a sleep diary. And you just write down, there's like 10 questions. What time did I go to bed? How long do I think it took me to fall asleep? What time did I wake up? Did I hit the snooze? A couple of other questions like that. You will get a fairly decent understanding of how well you are sleeping just by monitoring yourself. And so I think that's a good place for people to start. Now, if you want to go deep and you want to get all the details and you want to bring an Aura ring into it or a Whoop strap or whatever, go for it. But there are limitations, okay? So if you look at the literature, here's what the literature says about all of these devices, is they're all pretty decent at telling us when we fall asleep and when we wake up, but they're terrible at depth of sleep. Because here's the problem, Michael, is we measure depth of sleep from brain waves, right? So EEG waveforms. And so it's really hard to get EEG from your finger. So what you have to do is you have to take data that you can get from your finger and use it as what's called a proxy. So you take heart rate data, and you take temperature data, and you take oxygen data, and you say, well, most people are in REM sleep with this, so we think that you're in REM sleep with this, and it's quite difficult to really get some level of accuracy. But if I'm honest with you, you don't need it. Who gives a shit, okay? If you wake up and you feel good, you got the right amount because, again, your body scanned itself and determined what you needed. If you had a particularly emotional day, you might need a little bit more REM sleep, and that might fall in or out of the accepted values, right? Because you had an emotional day. Let's say your kid had a birthday party and some relatives came in that you hadn't seen in a while, and it was all joyous and you had a lot of fun. You're probably going to have a lot more REM sleep that night than you normally would have, and that's an okay thing. So I want people to not get bogged down by the metricing of it all, but I do think it's worthwhile to scratch a few notes in the morning and see where you're at. It's kind of like one of those things where like I weigh myself once a week. I don't weigh myself every day, and it kind of keeps me on track.
Gotcha. Speaking of metrics, what about sleep debt? Is this something you can make up? I know sometimes people try to make it up on the weekends. Like,
Yes.
Is there really value to that? Like, how does that work?
So it depends upon your age, and it depends upon what year it is. And the reason I say what year it is because every other year, the sleep community says there's no such thing as sleep debt, and then it says there is such a thing as sleep debt. So I'm not convinced, by the way, that we have the answer, but I do have an answer for certain age groups, okay? And so here's what I'll tell you is, if you've got a 13-year-old or a 15-year-old kid, let them sleep in on the weekends. My kids slept until 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturdays, okay? Because they needed it. Their bodies want them to stay up late and sleep late. Their whole circadian rhythm is off. And so for them, yes, they have a huge sleep debt, and they need to pay it off on the weekends. As adults, however, it becomes problematic because what happens is if you stay up late on Friday, sleep in on Saturday, stay up late on Saturday, sleep in on Sunday, Monday is going to suck because guess what? Your body wants to stay up late on Sunday and sleep in on Monday. And so you end up with something called social jet lag. The number one tip that I give across the board, every podcast, every lecture, is wake up at the same time 7 days a week.
Yeah.
If you do that, you will self-metric yourself. If you know you're waking up Saturday morning at between 6:30 and 7 o'clock in the morning, you're probably not out partying Friday night until 2 a.m. And that metrics you, that keeps you in line and keeps you going. Now, let's say you've been traveling, you have a big case, something's going on that week, and you are working until 11, 12, 1 o'clock every night, and then you're spinning around and having to get up at 6:30 because that's how your life works, and you get 5.5 hours all week long. So then would I turn to you and say, hey, you still need to get up at 6:30 on Saturday and Sunday? Probably not. I'd probably say, you know what? Sleep in by about a half an hour, 45 minutes. Here's where it gets problematic is for some people, if they sleep in any longer than that, they get this thing called sleep inertia, which makes them want to stay asleep. You ever wake up from a nap and feel like crap, not feel good? That's what I'm talking about. You want to avoid that if you possibly can. So what I'll do with some of my patients, let's say we've got this 5.5 hours during the week scenario. Normally they wake up at 6:30. I'll say, look, here's the deal. You can go to sleep and sleep until 7:30, but you got to get out of bed at 7:30. I want you to get some direct sunlight because sunshine helps turn off that melatonin faucet in your head. And I want you to take a nap at around 2 o'clock for about 25 minutes. Any longer than that, you're going to feel awful, but you'll get just enough to kind of lower that sleep debt buildup that's you've built up all week long, and it'll help you throughout the rest of the week.
Got it. And you mentioned this in your answer here, but what about naps? Are naps good for you? How long is the nap? You even, I think you coined the phrase like napa-latte.
I did. So number one, I love naps, especially while watching golf.
Yeah.
Rory steps to the tee box. It's perfect. And you can fall asleep, wake up 3 holes later, and you've missed nothing, right? So it's like the perfect kind of thing. But there's one group of people that should never, ever nap, and that's people with insomnia. It lowers their sleep drive and makes it even more difficult for them to sleep. And so some of them, they're dying during the day. They're like, oh, I feel like crap. All I want to do is nap. I don't sleep at night. No. Napping is a terrible idea. Now, there is another kind of nap, which you mentioned, which is a term that I coined called a napa-latte. So this is for my CEOs who are really dragging, but they've got, let's say you've got to, be in court, right? And you've only gotten 4.5, 5 hours of sleep. What do you go and do? Here's what you do is you take a cup of drip black coffee, no cream, no sugar, put 3 ice cubes in it merely to cool it down. Slug it as quickly as you can, and then immediately close your eyes for 25 minutes. So it turns out that the substance in your brain that makes you feel sleepy is called adenosine. When you look at adenosine and you look at the molecular structure of adenosine, it's one molecule off the structure for caffeine. So when you drink the coffee and you fall asleep, you burn through the adenosine. Caffeine is waiting in the wings. It fits perfectly into the receptor site and blocks the rest of the adenosine. you're good for 4 hours guaranteed. But don't do a napa-latte every day. That's not what it's meant for. It's really meant as an escape hatch on those nights where things really went wrong.
Gotcha. And I want to dig into creating like the ultimate sleep environment. When you're auditing someone's sleep environment, what are the biggest mistakes you typically find? What are some of the biggest tweaks that you make?
So the biggest one almost always is mattress. Here's the thing. You get what you pay for. Now, I'm not saying that you need to buy a $500,000 Hastons. By the way, they do make a $500,000 bed. I've slept on it before. It's actually quite comfortable. It should be for $500,000, right? But you can find a really high-level quality product for anywhere from like $1,500 on up to about $4,000, depending upon the whistles and bells and features and things like that you're looking for. I recommend to everybody the same firmness level, which is a medium firm. The data would suggest that that is the one that keeps your spine in alignment. The thing to remember about mattresses is mattresses have two functions. One is support, the other is comfort, right? And support is making your spine aligned. That way, all the muscles that attach to the spine can relax and then nutrition can flow. And so the goal is if you can get your spine as straight as possible, everything else relaxes and then the body kind of takes care of itself. Comfort keeps you in that position all night long. So you have to weigh the two of them. So having a medium firm bed usually settles the support idea. Comfort, on the other hand, is very personal. And so what I tell people all the time is I like hybrid beds in particular because you get the springs on the bottom, which give you the support, and then you get different layers of foam on the top, and that gives you the comfort layer, if you will. So kind of like if you're stacking the sandwich, you've got a really big, thick piece of bread on the bottom, and then a couple of layers of meat, and then a small layer of bread on the top. And that's kind of what you're looking for. So number one is, how old is your bed? Now, there's no guaranteed time. Like at one time, I wanted to create like a turkey timer that would go on the side of a mattress and would just pop when you knew your mattress was kind of done. Doesn't kind of work that way. So your body will tell you when you need a new bed. If you wake up and your body is sore more than 3 days a week and it's not from having a big workout, it's probably time for a new mattress. The second thing, and the thing that I would argue I would look at first, is the pillow. I've saved more people's sleep from changing their pillow out than almost anything else. If you have neck pain or upper shoulder pain, it's almost always the pillow. If you have low back pain, it's almost always the mattress. So understanding a sleep system, which is mattress, pillow, sheets, and duvet, I think is really what you want to be looking at first, right? And so what is the equipment that you're working for? So I'm a runner, right? And when I run, I can run with my flip-flops and a boombox on my arm, but my time's not going to be too good. But if I've got my Asics on and my dry fit wear and I've got my earbuds in and I've got a good tune going, I can throw off a 7.5, 8-minute mile, no problem. Equipment matters. Okay. Same holds true with sleep. Don't chintz on it. Don't go for, oh my God, I got to get this, $400 mattress. When you buy a $400 mattress, you get $400 mattress sleep, right? Like that's kind of the bottom line. My grandfather, who lived to 103 in 10 months, said you spend money on 3 things, Michael: eyeglasses, shoes, and mattresses. I'm pretty sure he was right on all 3 counts. And so I would say that would be the first place that I would take a look. Next is I look at the environment. And so the way I look at a bedroom is I look at the 5 senses, so sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, to see what's going on in the bedroom to be able to make it as optimal as I can. So the first thing I like to think about is air quality. So a super easy one is get yourself an air purifier. Think about it. You're in this room longer than any other room in the house. And you're breathing this air fairly regularly. You want this air to be clean, to be well purified, to make sure that the particulates are out so you're not getting nasal congestion, which would then cause nasal problems. And then you open up your mouth. Now you're mouth breathing. Now you got a whole nother problem on your hands, probably snoring. So you want to have good quality air. So good quality filtered air in the bedroom is definitely one of those things that I talk about with people. Having humidity is a plus. You want to have it at about 30 to 40% humidity is what the literature would say. So having a humidifier or a dehumidifier, depending upon what part of the country you live in, can be valuable as well. The next thing I look at is light. And so remember, light changes your body's ability to release melatonin. And so we want melatonin at night, so we want it as dark as humanly possible. Now, me personally, I can't handle blackout curtains because the room is so dark, I can't wake up in the mornings. So I use an old-fashioned eye mask. And while my wife says I look like, somebody from the 50s half the time, I love it. It works really well for me, and it's portable, so I can bring it on airplanes if I need it. I can bring it to hotels if I need it, and so it kind of gives me that opportunity to be able to not have a whole lot of light. But light is absolutely something that can have a big effect on you. Now, I want to also be clear, my wife sleeps with the television on all night long. All night long, okay? Big screen TV, light everywhere. That's why I have an eye mask on. For her, she can't sleep without it. Is she getting the highest quality sleep that she could get? No, of course not. But you try to tell my wife that she can't watch TV all night long and see how long you last in the relationship. Because it isn't going to be long, brother. I can assure you of that. So I modified, but it doesn't bother me. If it really bothered me, then I might move to a different room or I might change things around a bit. Earplugs are the next one that I like to talk a lot about. Is you really want it to be as quiet as possible, or it needs to be noises that make you feel comfortable. So now you might be wondering, noises that make you feel comfortable? What are you talking about, Michael? So I'll tell you what happened to me. And so we have two French bulldogs, and they both snore like crazy, and they both sleep in our bed. And my wife was going out of town to visit her family, and so I was in charge of the dogs. And usually when I've got the dogs, I put them in a crate or I kick them off the bed. And one of our dogs is older, and my wife said, if you can hear him snoring, then he's good. That changed the entire thing for me. So then all of a sudden, now I'm listening, and if I hear my dog snoring, I know he's safe, I know he's okay. That calms me down, and now I fall asleep. But historically, when I heard that dog snoring, I was getting pissed off. I'm like, I don't want to sleep next to a snoring bulldog. Like, this is awful. Yeah. But when I changed the emotional attachment to the sound, it became a pleasant sound. It became a sound that I was looking to hear because it actually helped calm me down. So I think people can look at sounds in different ways. There's some great new products on the market. I don't have any association with this product, but there's one called Ozlo, O-Z-L-O. It's a earbud that's meant to be worn at night while you sleep. And it actually recognizes when you get into a lighter stage of sleep and will click on music for you to help soothe you back to sleep. So it's pretty awesome in terms of the technology that they've got available out there. But sound is definitely a big one after light. Touch, we kind of mentioned with the pillows and the mattress, but I want to talk for just a second about temperature. So temperature is a big one. A lot of people out there ask me questions about temperature. And there's a lot of people who are working on or who have asked me questions about these thermoregulatory devices that you put in your bed that can make you warm or make you cold. So one of the projects that I'm working on, a new project, as a matter of fact, it's called Orion Sleep, and we'll put the website in the show notes. This is a thermoregulatory device that actually cools your body from beneath you. So it's a topper that you lay on top of, and it has a thin tube in it, and it will swish water through it. It's either warm water or cold water, and can either heat you up or cool you down. What's great about this is many people will say, oh, all I need to do is crank down the air conditioning in my bedroom and I'll be fine. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way because underneath the covers is a microclimate. And so you've got pajamas on, you've got covers on, you've got, air that's going. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening. There's nothing happening from directly beneath the body. Since a lot of people sleep on their back and, you don't have a lot of fat on your back, most people carry fat on their belly and their front, they're not insulated. And so when you lie on these types of devices, it can actually get you much colder, much faster. And that actually follows your biology. So your core body temperature at night rises till about 10:30. Then it hits a peak and then it drops. That drop is consistent with your brain producing melatonin. So you ain't got no drop in temperature and you ain't got no melatonin. So that's one of the reasons why we tell people we want to sleep in a dark, cool environment. What's nice about these thermoregulatory devices is this can actually make it significantly cooler for people who are, let's say, going through a particular time of life. So for folks who've got partners or themselves are going through menopause, guess what? This helps with those hot flashes. By the way, there's also something for men called andropause, where men can actually get hot flashes at nighttime. So it's not uncommon for us to see both sexes being really enjoying these types of products. Also, quite frankly, it's easier to fall asleep when it's cool beneath you.
Yeah. I want to dig into, I guess some of these are like sleep gadgets, supplements, that sort of thing. And you could tell me if this is legitimate and worth considering, or if, if it's just pseudoscience. So what are your thoughts on mouth tape and nose strips and those sort of things?
Sure. So mouth tape is the single worst invention I've ever heard. Just think about it. If you turned to your mother and said, I'm going to tape my mouth shut and go to sleep, she'd call you an idiot. Mouth tape is a terrible idea. Let me explain. There's actually been a meta-analysis that was done looking at 20 different studies involving mouth tape, and some people died. Asphyxiation. Okay. So mouth tape is not the answer. The reason that people tape their mouths shut is because of nasal congestion. So what ends up happening is you get a stuffy nose, your mouth drops open, and you breathe through your mouth. Then you suck air in quickly because you don't have two holes. You have one hole to get air in, and that produces a cadence which causes a snore. And so a lot of people say tape your mouth shut so that way you don't snore. And by the way, many people report, hey, my nasal congestion seems to clear up when I tape my mouth shut. So let's talk about the biology of what's really going on here. So first of all, this is not appropriate for anybody who has not been screened for sleep apnea. Because what happens is mouth tape completely masks your apnea symptoms. And you could wake up 2 years from now with a rip-roaring case of sleep apnea, which, by the way, has cardiovascular consequences like stroke and death. So for me, it's not worth it to tape my mouth shut, number one. Number two, it's a stupid idea. Now, can you get screened for sleep apnea, not have congestion, and then use mouth tape? Yeah, I think you can, but you need to really think through that as an idea set first. And again, none of the studies have looked at people with deviated septums. None of the studies have looked at people with high levels of congestion. So what I tell people to do is handle your congestion first. You can use a saline nasal spray. You can use a neti pot. You can use over-the-counter medications like Flonase or Nasacort, which used to be prescription and are now available. And they're purely local. They're not systemic, so you're not putting steroids in your body. So there's a lot of ways to reduce your nasal congestion without taping your mouth shut.
Got it. So what about the nose strips? The ones that
I like the nose strips a lot. My favorite one, though, is an internal nasal dilator. This is like a stent that goes in your nostrils. I know it sounds weird. I'm sticking my fingers up my nose here, but that's what it looks like. And it's called Mute, M-U-T-E, snoring. I have no affiliation with them, but I use them, especially when I drink whiskey. So my wife is like, if you're drinking bourbon, you go put those nose thingies in, Michael, because I don't want to listen to you snore all night long. And she's right.
Okay, so that's a good follow-up. So let's talk about the effects of alcohol. On sleep. And is there a way, because alcohol is notorious for just being horrible for sleep. I mean, it helps you probably get to sleep faster, but the quality is very poor. But let's say you want to have a drink. Is there a way to do this in a way that doesn't destroy your sleep?
Absolutely. I would say yes, there is. Now, I want to be fair. The best thing is to not drink. I can't say that that's not the case because it really is. Alcohol destroys stage 3-4 sleep, which is that Alzheimer's sleep we were talking about earlier that we don't want to destroy. So what we do know about alcohol is the closer to lights out it's consumed, and the larger the amount consumed closer to lights out that is consumed, the greater it has an effect on your sleep. So what am I recommending? Day drinking. No, I'm just kidding. But the earlier you drink, the better. So here's how I would do it if I was out there managing somebody's alcohol consumption is I would say, okay, you're going to have dinner. Let's say it's 7 o'clock. All right. Let's say you want to have a glass of wine with dinner because it's a nice pairing and, that's your thing you're into. Great. Order yourself a glass of wine. Drink your glass of wine with your meal, right? Then have a glass of water. Then order your second glass of wine and then a glass of water. Now you're done. You need to have approximately 3 hours before lights out. It takes the average human approximately 1 hour to digest one alcoholic beverage, but the sleep effects do hang on for a couple of hours. So that's why I want you to have 3 hours without any alcohol ingestion. But you can easily have 2 glasses of wine or spirits or beer and not have it have a completely disastrous effect on your sleep. Also, if you're not drinking every night, then you're fine. Like let's say that you're only having like a glass of wine like twice during the week and once on the weekends. I don't think I care that much. But if you're drinking wine every single night, number one, you might want to ask yourself why. That probably is not in your best interest from a health perspective. But number two, do you really need to? But I think this methodology works quite well. I've been talking about it for years. I've used it myself and it works for people. But yes, alcohol does make you feel sleepy, but it also has a thermogenic effect where it heats your body up. there's a big difference between going to sleep and passing out, right? And when people pass out, they wake up with the alcohol sweats, right? So they're drenched from head to toe. They've got to change their pillow and, their pajamas and things like that. That's alcohol increasing your temperature to wake you up and again, disrupting your sleep.
Yeah. And on the other side of that, so what about meal timing? So the idea is generally like the lower your resting heart rate before bed, generally the better your sleep quality. And, there's some people say, hey, you have that last meal 3 hours before you go to bed. But what if you go out to dinner and you're going to a 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. dinner? How do you make that work?
Absolutely. So I'll tell you a story about a guy that I met who does this really weird thing, but opened my eyes to this whole idea set. So guy's name is Brian Johnson. So you might have heard of him. He's this guy, he tests himself on every single thing. I mean, his erections, his sleep, his whatever, right? And so I had an opportunity to go out to dinner with him, with a few colleagues, and started to ask him a lot of questions. And number one, I like him, and I'll tell you why I like him, because he is the biggest sleep cheerleader there is. He talks about it from the beginning of his speech to the end. Sleep is really what's important for you in terms of your overall health. So I like that aspect. He does something weird, though. He said he stops eating at 11 a.m., and then doesn't eat and then goes to bed around 8:30 or I think 9 o'clock. And he says that one thing has improved his sleep more than any other thing. So I started to look into it because I used to tell people, hey, stop food 2 hours before bed, stop fluids 1 hour before bed, you should be okay. Turns out I was wrong. 3 hours really is probably the lower level limit of when you should stop eating and when you should stop drinking if you do not want these things to affect your sleep. Now, quite frankly, if you don't really care or it's not that big of a deal, then for you in particular, then go for it. But the body was not created to be able to digest lying down. It was created to digest sitting or standing. And so you really want to give your body the opportunity to get through the meal. Now, let's talk about the contents of the meal. So let's say you're out with clients and it's like, hey, everybody's going to the steakhouse afterwards. We're signing the deal. We're going to do this whole thing. What do I do? Okay, let's talk through that really quickly. So number one, you don't have to get the porterhouse. What you can do is get the filet. Only eat half of it. Get steamed vegetables with it and have a little bit of cauliflower mash. And guess what? You've been able to enjoy your meal with your colleagues and not overdo it. The key is not to have too big of them. If you're going to have to eat, try to not have too big of a meal. Now, some people would say you don't want a big steak in your stomach because it's a lot of protein and it makes it much more difficult to digest. That's accurate. But if you can't get away with having a salad or fish instead, which by the way would be better. If you could order salmon, by the way, instead of steak, salmon actually naturally has got omega-3s, which are super good for sleep. Then if you couple that with some steamed broccoli and, like I said, some cauliflower mashed potatoes or something that's not super duper high in starchy carbs, you can eat just fine later on and still have it be pretty decent.
Got it. But even with the fact that if you're out at dinner and you finish that dinner at 10 p.m., you have dessert, It's going to disrupt your sleep in some way. Maybe not as...
Absolutely. So here's what you want to do if you want to make it least disruptive. Don't order dessert because high processed sugar actually reduces melatonin production. Don't get me wrong. I love ice cream. It is my downfall. Like by far, I will eat ice cream whenever it is offered, which is problematic for me at least. But try not to eat dessert, avoid the aperitif, avoid the after dinner cocktail. Don't get decaf coffee. Get yourself an herbal tea, right? Something that has no caffeine in it, but still allows you to be conversational and hold a cup and do your thing. And when somebody gives you a hard time about it, which invariably they might do, reference this podcast and say, hey, I was listening to the Game Changing Attorney podcast, and I learned that this is actually better for my sleep. So that way I can represent you better tomorrow in court. That'll probably shut people up pretty quick.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So we talked about food. What about caffeine? What about the effect of caffeine on sleep?
I thought you were going to ask about cannabis. We can talk about cannabis after that.
We can talk about cannabis as well. So caffeine and cannabis, how late is too late? Because caffeine, I think, is okay, just not after a certain time of day, right?
Exactly. And so caffeine is exactly like another food. It's how close to bedtime and how much you put in your system. You're so much better front loading your caffeine, having it at 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, and then going decaf by noon or 2 is more than likely the best way to do this. Remember, caffeine has a half-life of between 6 and 8 hours, so only half of it is out of your system. So let's say you have a cup of coffee at 9 o'clock in the morning. You're good all day, and then 2 o'clock rolls around and you decide to have a second cup of coffee. You've just added another 8 hours of caffeine into your
Right.
system. And by the way, only half of it is eliminated because it's called a half-life. The quarter life for caffeine is 12 hours. So that means 25% of it is still swimming around in your head. So caffeine is a beverage that I like earlier in the day. But let's say you're losing focus and you want to do something. I like matcha because matcha has less caffeine to it, or green tea because green tea has got L-theanine in it, and L-theanine is a great focusing agent that you can move towards, and you can buy green teas without caffeine. So I would say caffeine earlier part of the day, if you possibly can, makes a lot more sense. But by no means do you have to eliminate it. Now, will I tell you that my patients who eliminate caffeine completely sleep better? Of course they do. But it also depends upon how much caffeine you drink and how often you have it and how big of a ritual it is for you. And is it part of your daily routine? Like if you have caffeine every single day with your partner and that is an important ritual that you guys have every morning, go for it. But do yourself a favor and make it half decaf, and save your sleep. Cannabis, on the other hand, is the opposite. Cannabis actually makes you feel logy and sleepy and tired. However, too high of a THC content, and for folks out there who may not know, THC is the substance inside of cannabis that makes you feel euphoric, makes you feel high. Too much of that lowers REM sleep and increases heart rate, neither of which are good for sleep. So once again, you want to be thoughtful about how much and when you participate. Now, I also want to be thoughtful about this. Are you participating in cannabis because you recreationally want to have fun, or are you using it as a medicinal to help you sleep? Because those are two very different scenarios. If you want to wreck it out and have fun and get stoned, I don't think I care. But if you do that up until the moment you fall asleep, that will absolutely positively have a big effect on your sleep. You will not get the depth of sleep that you're looking for. You will wake up with what we call a pot over, like a hangover, where you haven't gotten good deep sleep. Also, by the way, your HRV, if you monitor HRV, which is an overall metric of health, will be much lower because your heart rate is raised at night, and that's part of the HRV calculation. So if you are an avid vape or gummy person, you can be expected to have a lower HRV. Let's talk about cannabis not in the recreational sense, but in the medicinal sense. Like, hey, what if I just want to take a gummy, Michael, and go to sleep? Is that okay thing to do? So the answer is yes, but you need to be thoughtful about what's going on here. I want to be very, very clear. There's almost no evidence that I am aware of that CBD, as in dog, helps with sleep. It helps with inflammation or pain, and it helps with anxiety. So if you've got anxiety before bed or you've got pain before bed, CBD may help those two situations, which may allow the natural sleep process to come in, but it does not kick off the natural sleep process. CBN, as in nighttime, has been shown in at least 2 studies to help lower the number of arousals that you may have before bed. So when you're looking for products in a dispensary, you want to look for ones that have a higher CBN concentration and a lower THC and CBD concentration. And to be clear, you don't want more than 5 milligrams. You probably won't even feel it. The goal here is to not get high. The goal here is take something and then allow your body to go to sleep, right? And so what a lot of people do is they mix the two up and they're like, screw it, I'm going to take a gummy, watch Netflix, and then fall asleep. And that's what they do. And that's not necessarily the medicinal way. Also, it becomes slightly problematic. For example, let's say that you're using straight up flower or a vape, you don't know how big your dose is, right? So if I take a hit on a vape and you take a hit on a vape, we have different lung capacities. We could have very different dosages. So you want to have something that's metered or a metric dose. They do make those. There are now vapes that will only give you a certain amount, and those are the ones that I would recommend if you have to vape. I'm not a big fan of vaping as a doctor, generally speaking. We don't like vapes. I get it. It's not actual ignition of the material, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong with the vape. And so I'd rather people use a tincture or a liquid This is a dropper that you put under your tongue. Let it sit there, count to 30 or to 60 so it soaks up and in, and then it gets to you faster. The problem with gummies is you've got to eat it. It's got to go down to your stomach. It's got to mix around with your stomach, and then it's got to make its way back up. So you're looking at 45 minutes to an hour before you start to feel the effects of a gummy. And that can be problematic for people who aren't used to it, because what they do is they take a gummy and then it's 30 minutes later and like, it's not affecting me. I guess I should take 3 more. And then boom, boom, boom. And now they're stoned. And that's, again, not what we're kind of going for. I get it if you're trying to be recreational and you want to have some fun with some friends, please be safe. But if you're trying to use it for actual sleep, I think my recommendations would probably stand the test of time on that one.
Got it. So what about the other sleep supplements like melatonin, good or bad, and magnesium? There's different types of magnesium.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Great question. So my theory on supplementation is very straightforward. Go do blood work. Whatever you are deficient in, fix that first. Most people are deficient in magnesium, vitamin D, certain forms of iron. Test those out before you do anything. I can assure you, no one out there has a deficiency in ashwagandha, but they probably have a deficiency in vitamin D and magnesium. And once you get the body functioning with the right things in it, it's remarkable what your body will be able to do. And so I don't feel like you have to add stuff unless you need to. Let's say you do blood work. Let's say you have a vitamin D deficiency. You start out with vitamin D, probably 3,000 to 5,000 IUs or international units daily is where you would probably land on this one. I personally take D3. That's the one you should be taking. But my D3 comes with omegas. So I use a brand called Nordic Naturals. Again, no affiliation with them, but they have a great omega D3 combo. And at age 57, the one thing that my body absolutely positively needs more of is omegas. And so I take omegas and I take my D3 together in the morning time. The other thing my body is deficient in is magnesium. So I take magnesium. Now, there are 13 different types of magnesium on the marketplace. I want to be very clear. They're not all absorbed the same way. They don't all do the same thing. As a general guideline, you might want to look for magnesium glycinate because magnesium glycinate helps with absorption. It also helps with your stomach. Some people, if they take too much magnesium, they can get an upset stomach. By the way, you can overdose on magnesium and end up with massive diarrhea and dehydration. So more is not better. Usually you're running around 200 milligrams of magnesium. Now, I want to be clear, if you're a runner or a sweater and you have a big workout, you have depleted almost all of your magnesium. We have to eat our magnesium. Our body doesn't naturally make it. And so what happens is we take a supplement or we eat kale or whatever it is that you eat. The magnesium is stored in your bones and then it's pulled out as you need it for these big workouts or if you're a big sweater or things like that. But you've got to replace it on the regular. Unfortunately, you could eat a bushel of kale and you'd still not get enough magnesium. And so supplementation oftentimes is required. Now, I'll tell you the story because I met a guy who told me that his magnesium was the best magnesium in the universe. It helped everybody sleep. He wanted me to try it. He thought it was going to be fantastic. I said, I'll do you one better. I said, write me a check and I'll do a clinical trial on it because just because it works on me doesn't mean it's going to work on everybody else out there. So he handed me a check and he was right. So the magnesium that I've worked with that I ran the clinical trial on is called Upgraded Formulas Magnesium. It's not Upgraded Labs, it's Upgraded Formulas. It comes in a blue bottle. You can buy it on Amazon. They actually have the clinical trial on the website, so you can see me on there. But that's the magnesium that I recommend and that I take. That's my whole supplement stack, if I'm being honest. I don't need melatonin because my body is not deficient in melatonin. So that's a big misnomer is there's a lot of people out there who are like, melatonin, I got to take it every single night. Very, very few people require melatonin. To be honest with you, Michael, melatonin is good for jet lag, it's good for shift work, and it's good for people with a melatonin deficiency. Melatonin deficiencies have a tendency to roll around about age 55 to 60 is when we start to see those. And you can actually get your melatonin tested. You have to do it at nighttime because it's not around during the day. It's a slightly complicated test. It's not impossible, but you can definitely figure that part out. The good news, however, is that most melatonin is harmless become less for most people. However, there are a few situations that I want to highlight. So most people don't know this, but melatonin interacts with several medication and makes them less or ineffective. The ones I'm talking about specifically are the antidepressant medications, the SSRIs, the Prozacs, the Celexas, the Lexapros of the world. Those medications are highly affected by melatonin. And by the way, most doctors don't know that. And certainly most health food stores and places where you buy your supplements are not going to tell you that. It also affects birth control. Let me repeat that one more time. It affects birth control. So if you don't want to get pregnant, I would not be taking melatonin on the regular. It also affects diabetes medication and heart rate medication, so blood pressure meds. So you want to be thoughtful. If you decide you want to take melatonin, number one, tell your doctor. But by the way, your doctor probably isn't going to know this part, so look it up. Go ahead and punch your medication in with melatonin and see if there is an interaction effect. ChatGPT should pop it right up for you, and you should be able to figure it out pretty quickly. So I'm not a big fan of just willy-nilly using melatonin. Also, melatonin is not for children. I want to be very clear about this. So many pediatricians out there are like, melatonin is great. Give it to kids, no problem. Kids make about 4 times the amount of melatonin that they need. Also, melatonin is used as a contraceptive in large dosages in Germany. I can't think of anything worse for a young female developing body than to introduce a contraceptive when it's not necessary. So I don't recommend melatonin in children ever, except for one group of children. There is data to suggest that in kids on the autism spectrum, that they do quite well with 5 to 7 milligrams of melatonin, which, by the way, is a monster dose. The appropriate dose is somewhere between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams. The only company whose melatonin I like is called Herbatonin. They are the only ones who make a pure organic melatonin. It's made from seagrass, believe it or not. I like theirs, and I use that when I travel.
Got it. Okay. What are your thoughts on creatine?
I love creatine.
As it relates to sleep. Like I've been hearing, I don't know what is true, I'm sure you do, that the higher dosages, like beyond the 5 grams, like up there in the 15, the 20s, can help offset sleep deprivation.
That is correct. The data is clear, but you can only fool Mother Nature for so long. So if you're getting 5.5 hours on the regular and you're pushing in 20 grams of creatine in you, you're going to crash. Like, it's not going to work forever, right? And so don't be an idiot. Like, should you take creatine every day? I think the data is pretty consistent. Like, I think if you work out, creatine is a good idea at 5 grams a day, right? But could you go 10? Sure. Absolutely, you could go 10. If you had a really particularly bad night of sleep, could you bump it to 15? Absolutely, you could. But again, this isn't what you want to do on the regular. You want to get better sleep, so you don't need to use creatine to make you feel this way, right? So you want to be thoughtful about its use. But yes, the data does appear to be consistent that with sleep deprivation in particular, it seems to be quite helpful.
Got it. What about grounding sheets? Is this pseudoscience? Is this real?
So here's what I'll tell you is there are people who are EMF sensitive. I am not one of them. I've been treating patients for 26 years. In my 26 years, I've treated about 6. Okay. And the way we figured it out was we went to the breaker box and we just turned off the breaker box all night long. So nothing was on, no TV, no electricity through anything. And people slept significantly better. Like, we monitored them. So here's what I'll tell you is I don't think we have the equipment that allows us to measure EMF sensitivity in people. I think some people figure out that they are EMF sensitive. And in those cases, grounding sheets are probably not the worst idea I've ever heard. But to be clear, nobody's curing their insomnia with grounding sheets unless you are super EMF sensitive, which you would probably know by now.
Mm-hmm. What about saunas, right? Like sauna before bed or even cold plunge before bed. Do you recommend either of those?
So there's data on both. And so here's what I'll tell you is sauna before bed, you need to be thoughtful. It can't be immediately before bed, but about 90 minutes before bed, if you took a 10-minute sauna, it could actually be helpful. Very similar to taking a hot bath. So there's data showing that if you artificially increase somebody's core body temperature and then it drops, that drop allows people to produce that melatonin, so it can be helpful. Now, what some people say to me is they say, well, I want to get in the sauna for 30 minutes, Michael, and crank my temperature up, and then I'm going to jump into a cold plunge and knock it back down, and it's going to be fantastic. Well, good for you, but I don't think it's going to work particularly well. I don't know about you, but every time I've done a cold plunge, it's alerting as hell. Your eyes almost pop out of your head when you get into that thing. So I think the cortisol that gets jump started when you hop into there is counterproductive. What I'd rather see you do is do a light passive heating, like a sauna for, 5 or 10 minutes, not at the highest height. Allow your body to warm up, then take a cool shower so you don't get in bed sweaty, and allow your body to relax that way. I think that would be advisable. I've worked with a couple of different companies. Sunlighten is a company that I really like their saunas. We've got one and we just love it because it's got so many interesting programmable features to it.
Now, what about like go before bed, right? The idea is don't look at a bunch of screens and your phone and so on. But what about blue light blocking glasses? Can you get away with some of that?
Here's what I'll tell you is blue blockers, as they were called from the 70s, there's just not a lot of great data on blue light blocking glasses. Now, full disclosure, I had a line of blue light blockers 15 years ago because I thought the science was really good. I've reevaluated the science. I don't think the science is fantastic. But here's the thing. I don't think it's the blue light that's making people stay awake. I think it's their level of engagement. So I don't think I care if you're on your phone, but if you're trying to get your high score on Candy Crush, you ain't trying to go to bed. If you're scrolling through Facebook and getting, happy or pissed off about seeing your friends do things or not do things, you ain't trying to go to bed. You need runway to land the plane. That's what I try to explain to people. And so I understand, hey, this is my only time to catch up on life. No, it's not. I can assure you it's not. You can catch up on life tomorrow morning at breakfast if you really so need to scroll. What you need to do is you need to do things to lower your heart rate. In order to enter into a state of unconsciousness, you need a heart rate of about 60 or below. Okay? Don't do things that increase your heart rate. If you want to watch TV, I don't care. Watch TV, but turn the timer on so at least the damn thing clicks off and doesn't drive you crazy all night. Personally, I like to read or listen to a podcast or something that's very boring or relaxing, right? I personally also like to do breath work before bed or meditations before bed. My favorite is called 4-7-8 breathing. I think I've told you about it before, but this is when you slowly breathe in for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 7, and you breathe out for a count of 8. It takes some practice. It's not something that you can do very easily, but if you can get through about 20 cycles of that, it immediately dumps your heart rate below 60, and it's much easier to fall asleep.
I love that. I love that. I am now on 70 consecutive days of breath work, and I do about 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes before bed. Not the most exciting thing in the world, but definitely has made a positive impact on sleep.
Oh, and it gives you more energy during the daytime. Also, there's at least one study that looks at oxygen exchange at sleep. So if you do breath work during the day, it appears as though you may have better oxygen exchange at night.
So what about like when you fall asleep and you wake up in the middle of the night? Any tips on getting back to sleep?
Absolutely. So my most popular video on YouTube answers this very question. So I'll go into a few of the answers, but I will recommend that people check out my YouTube channel. So number one, the first thing that you want to do is don't go pee. Now you might be wondering, like, what is he talking about? Most people, when they wake up in the middle of the night, they're like, well, I'm up. I might as well go pee. It's probably not the best idea because remember, when you go from a lying position to a seated position to a standing position, you change your heart rate quite a bit. When you change your heart rate and it goes up, now you got two problems. Now you got to go back to sleep and you got to lower your heart rate. I'd rather you just stay in bed if you don't actually need to pee. Most people sleep on their side. So what I tell them to do is roll over onto your back and slowly count to 30. If you still need to pee, please go pee, but don't turn on any lights. Have some strategically placed night lights so you can get in and get out without turning the lights on, because otherwise you told your brain it's morning and it stops producing melatonin. The goal here is to get back to bed and to be able to relax. The second thing that you don't want to do is don't look at the clock, because you instantly do the mental math and now you're pissed off. It's 3:30 in the morning. I've got to get up in 2.5 hours. Sleep, sleep, sleep. And you try to force yourself to sleep. Dude, nobody in the history of time has been able to force themselves to sleep like that. It just doesn't work that way because your energy is going in the opposite direction. Your energy is going up, not down, right? So don't look at the clock. Don't go pee unless you have to. And do these breathwork exercises to lower your heart rate. There's more detail in the video, but I think those are the great starting points for people out there where I think they're going to find some good resolution to their rest.
Got it. So for somebody who's been listening to this point in the podcast, if you had to say here, there's like 3 things you could do if you take away nothing else in this podcast when it comes to improving your sleep, what would you say those 3 are?
So the 3 things are, number 1, wake up at the same time every single morning, 7 days a week. I don't care if it's Saturday or Sunday. Lower level limit is 5.5 hours of sleep. So you don't want to get less than 5.5 hours sleep. So that would be number 1 thing I want people to do. Number 2 thing I would say people should do is also in the morning time, I want you to go outside and get some sunlight. Get some direct sunlight if at all possible. It makes vitamin D, which is a circadian pacemaker, and it gets you more present in the morning time, helps kind of move some of that fog that people have in the morning time. So I think that's a good one. And then I'd say number 3 would be stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Again, caffeine is such a big sleep offender. If you can avoid that, I think you're going to be much better off.
Got it. And I think you mentioned one earlier, but what are some of the projects you're working on? Any cool new things in the world of sleep?
Yeah, so I am working on a few different things. So number 1, I had a new book come out this past January. It's called Sleep, Drink, Breathe. Wellness is Too Complicated. We talked a little bit about it at the top of the pod. Please, if you're interested, go check that out. My YouTube channel is awesome. We've got over 900 videos there. And this Orion Sleep product, this is the sleep cooling device that I mentioned a little bit earlier. This is kind of my new big thing. I want as many people to get on this thing as possible. It not only is it less expensive than most of the other options that are out there, but it also has a wider range in terms of its temperature. We can make people warmer or cooler. Also, by the way, we can have one person on one side of the bed and one person on the other side of the bed. One person can be hot, one person can be cold. We can switch them around. It doesn't really matter. So it's really very personalized temperature regulation, which arguably is probably the easiest and best way to improve sleep quality is by making sure that your temperature is pretty regulated. The only other thing I think people should know about is sleep testing has changed dramatically. So it used to be you'd have to go to a lab, you'd have 27 electrodes glued to your head, you'd have respiratory belts. Like it was kind of a nightmare to get yourself sleep tested. Since COVID, that has changed dramatically. If people swing on over to my website, which is sleepdoctor.com/Dr. Mike, so DRMIKE, you can actually purchase your own sleep test nowadays. And by the way, it comes to your house. All you have to do is wear it on your wrist. And so there's not a bunch of wires. You don't feel like, weird or anything like that. You push a button, you go to sleep. You push a button when you wake up. The information jumps to your phone through Bluetooth. You meet with an experienced doctor on the other end of it, and you learn what's going on with your sleep. Ever since COVID, nobody wants to sleep in the same bed as anybody else. And so not only are we getting people at home where it's a much better environment, but I feel like we're getting better data on people, and that can be very, very important. Now, I will also tell you, people avoid getting sleep tested because they're like, I don't want to be diagnosed with sleep apnea and end up with a CPAP machine. That would suck, Michael. So to be clear, there are a lot of other options besides a CPAP machine. I also want to be clear, CPAP is the best of the bunch. It works 99% of the time. A lot of people don't understand it, but the CPAP of old days is not the CPAP of new. The masks are better. The pressure is better. Like, it's a much better experience. But I hear you. If that's not your thing, there are mouth guards that it can be created by a sleep certified dentist. There are different things that can be put on the tongue that can actually reduce your tongue size, which can help with sleep apnea. And then, of course, there are mild all the way to severe surgical interventions that can go on. So there's a whole host of different options. So do me a favor, don't not get tested because you're afraid of getting on CPAP. Figure out what's going on first, and then let's find the right solution for you.
I love it. And Dr. Breus, as we come to a close, this being the Game Changing Attorney podcast, what does being a game changer mean to you?
So, for me, it's about giving information that really makes a difference. I've been very fortunate. My topic set of sleep is one of the ones that everybody seems to be interested in, and everybody is looking for information. And so for me, I try to give very practical based tips like stop caffeine by 2 p.m., stop exercise 4 hours before bed, things like that so that people can follow the guidelines. And so for me, being a game changer is giving people practical, useful information that they can apply quickly.
I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Breus for taking the time to join us on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691 and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on our interview with Dr. Michael Breus, see the show notes for this episode in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.